The night on Tatooine was cold and silent, interrupted only by the wind blowing across the dunes and the distant glow of the stars. Obi Wan Kenobi, sitting at the entrance to his cave, watched the horizon as he immersed himself in his own thoughts. Guilt weighed on his shoulders like a burden impossible to ignore. He had failed Anakin, had allowed his apprentice to become what he had sworn to destroy. But there, amidst the solitude of the desert, there was a new responsibility upon him. Luke Skywalker was still a boy, an uncertain future in his hands. If there was any way to correct his mistakes, it would be to train the boy not to follow the same path as his father. A shiver ran down Obi-Wan's spine when he felt a presence in the Force, a familiar energy that he hadn't noticed for years. He stood up immediately, his eyes searching the void until, little by little, a translucent figure appeared before him. A tall man with a serene expression and a compassionate gaze. Time seemed not to have touched him, but his presence was unmistakable. Obi-Wan took a deep breath, feeling a tightness in his chest as he recognized that face. Master Qui Gon? His voice came out low, almost like a whisper of disbelief. Qui-Gon Jinn smiled slightly, crossing his arms as if he were facing an old friend. It took a while, but you finally heard me, Obi-Wan. The old master's voice carried the same tranquility as always, and for a brief moment, Obi-Wan felt like a young Padawan again. I thought I'd never make it, he admitted, taking a hesitant step towards the specter. I tried so hard. Qui-Gon tilted his head, the tone of his voice carrying a touch of humor. And you kept trying with the same stubbornness as always, didn't you? But I'm here now, and we have a lot to do. Luke's training must begin now, Obi-Wan. Time is a luxury we don't have. Obi-Wan hesitated for a moment, remembering his own failures. What if I fail again? Qui-Gon laid an ethereal hand on his former apprentice's shoulder and replied, It's not about failure, it's about preparation. Teach him and, together, we'll make sure he's ready to face the fate that awaits him. Seized by a new sense of duty, Obi-Wan took Luke with him to live in a nearby cave, isolated from the rest of his uncle's farm. There, far from the distractions of the outside world, he began to teach the boy the first principles of the Force. Qui-Gon watched them, intervening only when necessary, guiding Obi-Wan on how to correct his approach. The old master knew that Luke could not be trained as a traditional Jedi, as there was no longer a council to follow his rules. The training needed to be adapted, focused on intuition and a direct connection with the Force, something Qui-Gon had always believed to be essential. During the silent nights, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon would meet to discuss Luke's progress. Obi-Wan quickly realized that the boy had a natural connection to the Force, but that his impetuosity was eerily reminiscent of Anakin's. He's like his father, murmured Obi-Wan, as he watched Luke try to lift a small rock with just the thought. Qui-Gon nodded. But unlike him, Luke will have guides who will now understand him better. Don't treat him like a soldier, but like an explorer of the Force. He needs to feel, not just obey. This approach led Luke to develop a keen awareness of the Force from an early age. When he carried out a midichlorians test, Obi-Wan was surprised to see that Luke had an extremely high number, although still lower than Anakin. This explained why the boy assimilated the concepts of training so quickly. The power is in him, but how he uses it will depend on our teaching, said Qui-Gon, emphasizing the importance of guiding Luke towards a balance between emotion and reason. Obi-Wan, for his part, felt an even greater weight on his shoulders, for he knew that any mistake could condemn Luke to the same dark fate as his father. The cave became the perfect refuge for training. With few distractions, Luke learned to meditate and feel the Force in everything around him. Close your eyes and listen, Obi-Wan instructed. Feel the wind, the heat of the rocks, the energy flowing through everything. Luke, still young, found the experience strange at first, but over time he began to perceive the Force not as something abstract, but as a living part of everything around him. Qui-Gon smiled as he saw the boy's evolution, noticing that his mind was expanding faster than Anakin's at the same age. Over the years, the training intensified. Luke not only learned to control the Force, but also began to develop a deep understanding of its philosophy. His connection with the Force allowed him to begin to see Qui Gon too. He asked questions that Anakin never did. Why is the dark side so powerful? Or what does balance really mean? Obi Wan and Qui Gon always answered wisely, encouraging the boy to think for himself. The dark side is a choice, not a destiny, Qui Gon once explained. It is easy and seductive, but it destroys those who embrace it. Luke listened attentively, absorbing each teaching as an essential truth. Obi-Wan noticed that, despite the similarities with Anakin, Luke possessed something his father never had: patience. This made him a unique student, able to wait for the right moment to act. He doesn't rush into things like Anakin did, commented Obi-Wan one evening. Qui-Gon smiled and replied, because he doesn't carry the same anger inside him. Luke doesn't have his father's emotional scars, and that can be his greatest strength. The training continued with this philosophy, focusing not just on combat, but on harmony with the Force. When Luke was old enough to understand the truth, Obi-Wan revealed his father's identity to him. The boy was shocked, but contrary to expectations, he didn't react with hatred or disgust. Instead, he asked, "Does that mean I can save him?" Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan looked at each other. "It will be his choice," replied Qui-Gon, "but your role will be to give him a chance." With this revelation, Luke understood that his training was not just about becoming stronger, but about changing the fate of his family and perhaps the entire galaxy. As Luke went deeper into his connection with the Force, his perception of the universe expanded beyond what his eyes could see. His intuition became sharper, and during meditations, he could sense the presence of distant beings and pick up echoes from the past. Qui-Gon Jinn, who guided him in these exercises, noticed how quickly the boy assimilated the lessons, something that not even Obi-Wan had predicted. "He learns as if he already knew," Obi-Wan once commented. Qui-Gon just smiled and replied, "Because he already knows. The Force doesn't teach Obi-Wan. It only reminds." During one of these meditations, Luke had a vision unlike any other he had ever experienced. At first, disconnected images took over his mind, but soon the outlines became clearer. He saw a suffering woman, sweaty and panting, holding a newborn baby. Luke's heart raced as he somehow knew that this baby was him. But next to the woman, there was another baby. Luke felt a wave of confusion and struggled to understand. "Do I have a brother?" he thought, trying to deepen his connection with the vision. Before he could come up with an answer, the image changed again. This time, he saw a beautiful young woman with brown hair and a determined look, who smiled warmly at him. The connection was immediate. Luke's heart raced and, opening his eyes suddenly, he said out loud, "I have a sister." His breathing was rapid, as if he had just woken up from an intense dream. Qui-Gon, who was watching him intently, looked over at Obi-Wan and gave him a slight smile, followed by a discreet nod. Obi-Wan crossed his arms, sighing deeply. Luke didn't know what that meant, but he would soon have his answer. Obi-Wan approached and sat down next to the boy, measuring his words carefully. "You're evolving fast," he said with a tone of pride and a certain caution. "The Force has revealed something very important to you." Luke remained silent, trying to organize his thoughts, until Obi-Wan decided to tell him the truth. "Yes, you have a sister. Her name is Leia, and she lives on Alderaan under the care of Senator Bail Organa. From birth, you were separated to ensure that Vader and the Emperor would never find you." The revelation weighed heavily on Luke, but it also brought a sense of belonging that he had never felt before. "So, she can feel the Force too?" he asked hopefully. Qui-Gon intervened, his voice echoing softly around them. "She has the same potential as you, Luke, but her path was different. Her moment of awakening hasn't come yet, but one day it will." Luke nodded, reflecting on his master's words. The idea that his sister was so close and yet so far away awakened in him a deep need to know her. With Bail Organa's approval, Obi-Wan took Luke to Alderaan for the meeting. The young man was anxious and nervous, not knowing how his sister would react. When they landed on the planet, they were welcomed in Organa's grand palace. Bail led them into a large room illuminated by the soft glow of the planet's crystal towers. When Leia entered the room, Luke felt something familiar. He recognized her even before Bail said anything. The bond between the two was already there, even without words. "Leia," said Bail, placing a gentle hand on his adopted daughter's shoulder. "This is Luke, your brother." Silence filled the room. Leia, always used to keeping control of situations, didn't know what to say. She watched Luke for a few moments, as if trying to see the truth inside him. Luke, on the other hand, felt something inside him click into place, as if a missing piece of his life had finally been found. "Did you know?" asked Leia, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "I just found out," replied Luke, smiling slightly, and at that moment, without further explanation, she smiled back. After the revelation, Bail and Obi Wan explained the reasons for the separation. Leia absorbed the information maturely, but inside her there was a whirlwind of feelings. The weight of the truth was heavy, but somehow it made sense. "If it was to protect us, then I can't question it," she said, after a few moments of reflection. Still, his mind was restless. If Luke was her brother, then that meant her father. She didn't finish the thought, but Obi-Wan knew what was going on in her head. "That's a conversation for another day, young Leia," he said softly. From that moment on, the two Skywalkers kept in touch. Even though they went their separate ways, they found discreet ways of communicating without attracting the attention of the Empire. Luke, eager to share everything he was learning about the Force, tried to introduce Leia to the path of self-knowledge, but she, focused on her role in politics and the growing rebellion, was not yet ready to accept this side of her identity. "Maybe one day," she said in one of her secret messages to Luke. He just smiled as he read those words because deep down he knew that day would come. Every meeting between the two was meticulously planned to avoid any suspicion from the Empire. Obi-Wan and Bail Organa ensured that everything was done with extreme care. If Vader or the Emperor were to suspect the existence of another Skywalker, all would be lost. Even so, Luke and Leia formed a strong bond, something that not even distance could weaken. Fate would still bring them together at decisive moments, and when that day came, the galaxy would never be the same. Years passed and Luke, now 17, finally completed his training and became a Jedi. Although he was still young, his mastery of the Force and combat skills already rivaled those of Obi-Wan, who was an experienced master. Each duel between the two became more balanced, and Obi-Wan, impressed, recognized Luke's natural talent. But what really set the young Skywalker apart was his emotional balance. He saw movements before they even happened, something that Qui Gon Jinn described as a pure, instinctive connection with the Force. "He doesn't just fight with his eyes or his saber," Qui Gon once said. "He senses the battle before it begins." At the same time, his bond with Leia grew stronger and stronger. From the day they learned the truth, they became great friends and confidants, sharing not only their secrets, but also their dreams and fears. Leia, for her part, grew within the Rebel Alliance, gaining respect and influence with her leadership and political skills. She saw Luke as a natural ally for the cause and gradually began to plant him within the rebel movement. The young Jedi, who had spent his life isolated between the sands of Tatooine and the lessons of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, felt that he had finally found a greater purpose. The ideals of the Rebel Alliance began to shape Luke as deeply as Qui-Gon's teachings. He saw the injustice of the Empire and knew he could do more than just hide and wait for the right moment. But at the same time, his master's teachings echoed in his mind. A Jedi was not a soldier, and his fight should be for balance, not destruction. This duality grew inside him, fueling questions that not even Obi-Wan could answer. "The path of a Jedi and the path of war should never cross," warned Qui-Gon. "But sometimes the Force puts us at crossroads that are impossible to avoid." It was in the midst of these reflections that, in one of his meditations, Luke had a vision that would change his destiny forever. He saw the image of Darth Vader, surrounded by the shadows of the dark side. However, as he delved deeper into the Force, Luke realized something unexpected. Behind the imposing armor and menacing aura, there was still something: goodness. a glimmer of light, almost gone, but still present. Luke felt with unshakable certainty that Anakin Skywalker was not completely lost. He was there, trapped inside the monster he had become. What if there was a chance to bring him back? Disturbed by the vision, Luke sought out Leia to share his feelings. She was initially silent, absorbing her brother's words. The idea that Darth Vader, the galaxy's tormentor, had any goodness left in him seemed impossible. But as she looked into Luke's eyes, she realized that he really believed it. And more than that, she felt that he wanted to believe it too. "If there's a chance," said Leia, her voice heavy with emotion, "then we have to try." Determined, the two of them took this revelation to Obi Wan. The Jedi Master listened attentively, his countenance becoming increasingly closed as Luke spoke of his intentions. When he had finished, Obi Wan sighed deeply. "Luke, do you know what you're saying? Vader is no longer Anakin. He's a Sith Lord, a creature shaped by the dark side. You can't just bring him back with words." But Luke stood firm. "I'm not saying it will be easy, Master, but I know he's still there. I felt it." Silence settled between them for a few moments, until another presence appeared in the room. For the first time, Leia saw Qui Gon Jinn appear before her. The Jedi Master's spirit radiated a deep calm, and his gentle gaze rested on the young woman. "You can see me," he said with a slight smile. Leia's eyes widened in surprise, but at the same time, a part of her felt that it made sense. "The Force is strong in you, Leia, just as it is in your brother." Obi-Wan looked at Qui-Gon, still reluctant to accept Luke's plan, but waited for what his former master would say next. Qui-Gon turned to the young Jedi, who knew Anakin's story, and said, "If you wish to try, try, but know that your chances are slim. The Vader you will face is not the same boy I freed, nor the same man your mother knew." Luke nodded, already expecting this answer. "I know, but if there's a chance, I have to try." Qui-Gon sighed and, for a moment, his expression looked heavy. "Then prepare for the worst, Luke. If he can't be saved, you'll need to be ready to face it." The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Luke knew what it meant. If he failed, he would have to fight his own father. Obi-Wan intervened, still skeptical. What if he falls into Vader's trap? If it's a fatal mistake? Qui-Gon looked at his former apprentice and replied simply, "Luke's fate belongs to the Force." With this certainty, a plan was hatched. Luke and Leia, together with the Rebel Alliance, would need to find a safe way to get close to Vader without alerting the Emperor. Leia would use her connections within the rebellion to facilitate the meeting, while Luke would prepare for any eventuality. Obi-Wan, though hesitant, knew he couldn't stop Luke from following what he believed to be his path. Using their knowledge of Imperial routes and protocols, the Rebel Alliance devised a daring plan to infiltrate Luke on one of Darth Vader's ships. To do this, they used a seized Imperial ship, disguising it so that it could blend in with the Empire's fleet without arousing suspicion. Every detail was carefully planned. Updated access codes, Imperial uniforms, and a route that would take them directly to the ship where Vader was. The tension in the air was palpable, as any mistake could mean the end of the mission before it even began. Luke, now a fully trained Jedi, remained calm. He knew he had to rely on the Force to guide his steps. His goal was not to destroy, but to save. When the ship was allowed to dock, Luke donned an Imperial uniform and descended into the hangar as if he were an officer on a mission. His heart was pounding, but his mind was in complete control. Every step was calculated, every move planned. He walked through the cold, metallic corridors of the Imperial ship, his breathing controlled, his senses sharp. The place exuded order and discipline, but also fear and submission. The officers hurried past. The stormtroopers kept to their patrols without questioning their presence. At every turn, Luke used the Force to influence minds, diverting the attention of anyone who might notice something unusual. Little by little, Luke advanced. When he encountered smaller groups of stormtroopers, he acted with precision. He moved like a shadow, silent and lethal. With quick, precise blows, he neutralized his opponents without alerting the rest of the crew. The Force guided him in every confrontation, anticipating movements, revealing dangers before they even arose. One by one, the guards fell unconscious. He didn't need to kill because his mission was different. As he approached Vader's chamber, he felt the Sith's presence growing, like a dense fog trying to envelop him. But Luke stood firm. Reaching the final corridor, Luke encountered two massive doors. Behind them, he felt the powerful and imposing aura of Darth Vader. He took a deep breath, gathered his resolve, and, with a slight wave of his hand, the doors slowly opened, creaking as they revealed the shadowy figure of Vader, standing in the center of the room. The Sith Lord turned slowly, his helmet reflecting the cold lights of the room. His gaze landed on Luke, and his mechanical breathing echoed through the room. Luke asked, "Do you know who I am?" Vader, watching Luke curiously, said, "There's something familiar about you. I feel that the Force is strong in you." He took a step closer. "Obi Wan." "Yes, you're Obi Wan's disciple." Luke stood firm, his eyes fixed on the man who had been his father. "Yes, I was trained by Obi Wan," he replied calmly, "and by the one who once freed him, Qui Gon Jinn." There was a moment of silence. The mention of his former liberator's name made Vader hesitate. So they sent you to kill me." His voice carried a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Luke shook his head. "No, I decided to come because I realized that my father, Anakin Skywalker, is still alive inside you." Vader remained motionless for a moment before giving an answer. "No, that's not possible." Luke took a step forward, his voice serene but charged with conviction. "Yes, I'm your son. You know it's true. Feel it inside you, Father. You know it." A heavy silence filled the room. Luke sensed the growing conflict inside Vader. But then, with a sudden movement, Vader activated his red lightsaber. "Anakin is dead," he said, advancing with ferocity. Luke activated his own lightsaber at the last moment, defending himself masterfully. The clash of blades lit up the room, but Luke didn't attack. He just blocked Vader's blows, deflecting them with precision, without fear, without hesitation. With each strike, Vader began to realize that his physical advantage didn't exist against Luke. The young man moved with speed and efficiency, without being carried away by emotion. It was as if he predicted the attacks before they even happened, and Vader began to feel his own limitations. His armor made him slow compared to Luke's speed and fluidity. The young Jedi was not only strong in the Force, he was experienced. Every movement showed patience and absolute control. "I see Obi Wan has trained you very well," admitted Vader, breathing heavier as he continued the fight. Luke kept his gaze calm. "You know you can't beat me," he said, blocking another blow. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to give you a choice. Together, we can defeat the Emperor and restore the Republic." Vader hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of Luke's words. He saw his son's strength, his potential, and he couldn't deny that the young man was powerful. "Do you have any idea what we could do together? We'd be unbeatable." The offer carried not only Vader's voice, but the shadow of the dark side trying to seduce Luke. But the young Jedi just shook his head. "I will never join you for that purpose." Vader clenched his fists. If he couldn't convince him, then he would overpower him. He began to fight strategically, using his experience to try and wear Luke down. He threw objects through the air, trying to destabilize him, while advancing with a strong blow. But Luke used the Force to deflect the projectiles and anticipated the attack. In a single precise movement, he cut off Vader's right arm, sending his saber crashing to the ground. The Sith Lord fell to his knees, defeated. Luke, looking at the fallen man in front of him, realized that this was no invincible monster. He was a broken man, a warrior trapped by his own darkness. Luke raised his saber, but not to attack. He switched off the blade and took a step back. "Come with me, Father, or you'll leave me no choice." Vader, still holding the bloody stump where his mechanical arm used to be, looked up at Luke. "One day, you will see the power of the dark side, and then you'll become like me." Luke just watched him for a moment before turning away. "Think about what I said. Something tells me we'll meet again." As he approached the exit, Luke used the Force to open the doors, but before he left, he turned one last time and, his voice laden with meaning, said, "Father, may the Force be with you." He then left unnoticed, returning to the rebel ship. Darth Vader remained there, motionless, his saber lying beside him. Luke's words echoed in his mind, piercing the barriers he had erected over the years. For the first time in decades, he felt something that wasn't anger, hatred, or pain. He felt doubt. Something inside him was beginning to awaken, and it scared him more than any enemy he had ever faced. After carefully following the security protocols established by the Alliance, Luke made sure he wasn't tracked before returning to the Rebel base. His landing was discreet, attracting no attention, but when he got off the ship, he was immediately greeted by Leia and Obi Wan. There was tension in the air, a mixture of expectation and concern. Leia was the first to approach. "Well?" she asked, her gaze full of urgency. Luke took a deep breath before answering. "He's gone," he said, his voice calm but laden with emotional weight. "I've seen that there's still something inside him, but he refuses to believe it." Obi-Wan crossed his arms and nodded slowly. Qui Gon was right. He won't give in so easily. Later, in a conversation alone with Leia, Luke revealed more details of the meeting. He recounted how Vader hesitated, how for a brief moment he seemed to waver, but in the end, clung to his identity as Darth Vader. "He's still there, Leia. I know he is. I just need more time." Leia, who had been listening intently, put her hand on Luke's shoulder. "Don't give up," she said firmly. "But remember, there's a limit to this. The Empire must fall, and you are a key part of that. We can't risk losing the chance to free the galaxy by waiting for something that may never happen." Luke bowed his head for a moment, reflecting. He understood the urgency of the fight against the Empire, but he also knew that his father's fate was inevitably linked to this war. A few days later, Luke and Obi-Wan left for Tatooine, where they met once again with Qui Gon Jinn. The spirit of the Jedi Master was waiting for them in the cave, his presence radiating serenity. Luke recounted the meeting with Vader, describing every detail, every word exchanged. At the end, he looked up at Qui-Gon and said with determination, "If I want to bring him back, I have to eliminate the biggest shadow holding him back, the Emperor." Obi-Wan raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Qui-Gon, on the other hand, crossed his arms and pondered for a moment before replying. "It's hard to predict how that would affect Vader, but yes, without Sidious, the chains that imprison him would be weakened." Qui-Gon then warned Luke about the Emperor's immense power. "You faced Vader and survived, but Sidious has no limitations of his own. His powers in the Force are immense. He doesn't need a saber to defeat you." Luke nodded, aware of the danger. "I'm willing to prepare for it. I want to start right away." Qui-Gon smiled slightly. "Luke, Obi-Wan and I have already taught you everything we know. To take the next step, you'll need a more experienced master." Obi-Wan, who already seemed to be waiting for this answer, looked at Luke. "You need to find Yoda." Without wasting any time, Luke set off for the swamp planet where Yoda had gone into exile. The arrival was turbulent, as the planet's hostile environment made landing difficult. As soon as he landed, Luke felt the presence of someone watching him. The mist and twisted logs hid small shapes that seemed to move around him. He walked cautiously until a familiar hoarse voice broke the silence. A Jedi, young you are, but ready to be here are you?" Luke turned quickly and saw a small being with green skin and wise eyes watching him curiously. "Are you Yoda?" he asked. The Jedi Master smiled slightly. "How much knowledge do you have? But you still have a lot to learn." Luke explained who he was and the reason for his visit. He told him about the Empire, about Vader, and about his intention to confront the Emperor. Yoda listened in silence, his eyes studying the young Skywalker's every expression. After a long moment, he sighed and said, "Powerful the Force is in you. Defeat the Emperor you can, but much learning you need." Without any further questions, Yoda turned and started walking, and Luke understood that the training was beginning at that moment. The young Jedi followed him without hesitation. The days passed and Luke began to realize that training with Yoda was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just about combat, but about delving deeper into the Force, about understanding its essence. Amidst the dense trees and roots of the swamp, he was taught to expand his perception, to feel the Force not just as an energy around him, but as something alive within him. A Jedi must not see with his eyes, Yoda taught him. Feel, yes, with the heart and with an open mind. Luke learned to meditate more intensely, entering states of deep connection with the Force that he hadn't thought possible before. In addition to the spiritual connection, Yoda challenged him physically, putting him through extreme training. Luke ran through the trees carrying Yoda on his back, dodged obstacles while holding objects suspended in the air, and had to keep his balance on submerged logs while defending himself from attacks. With each challenge, Yoda pushed him harder, testing his patience and endurance. Resist fatigue, fear, despair. That is what a Jedi must do, said the Master. Luke felt his body and mind grow stronger than ever before. The weeks progressed and Luke realized that he had changed. He was no longer just a young man who wielded a lightsaber with dexterity. He felt the Force in every cell of his body, anticipated movements before they happened, and, most of all, began to understand the true essence of a Jedi. Power was not a weapon, but a state of being. He finally understood Obi Wan's patience, Qui Gon's vision, and Yoda's wisdom. When he looked at his own reflection in the water of one of the swamps, he saw that his countenance no longer bore the same impulsive look as before. He had matured. One night, while watching the stars between the treetops, Yoda approached. "There you are," he said in his calm voice. "The road ahead will be dangerous, but strong you have become." Luke nodded, feeling ready. His training time was over. The mission that awaited him now was the most difficult of his life, to confront the Emperor and perhaps bring his father back. Back at the rebel base, Luke, Obi Wan, and Leia met to draw up a new plan. This time, there would be no room for error. The Emperor had to be eliminated and the Empire brought down once and for all. The strategy involved a new infiltration, taking advantage of the movement of the Imperial fleet to get closer to the command center. However, this time things didn't go as planned. During the approach, the Empire's security systems detected Luke's ship. Vader, who had already started investigating the last invasion, immediately recognized the ship's signature. "He's back," he muttered, sensing his son's presence through the Force. Without hesitation, he ordered them to capture the ship without destroying it. When the ship was boarded, the stormtroopers entered to arrest Luke. But he was prepared. Using the Force, he moved through the shadows, eliminating the soldiers one by one, until the hangar was silent. Hidden inside the ship's internal compartments, he waited until the movement ceased. With all the soldiers neutralized, he put on an Imperial uniform and made his way through the corridors, infiltrating the ship's structure without arousing suspicion. His objective was clear: to get to Palpatine and end this war. The journey through the cold corridors of the ship was intense. Luke used his perception skills to avoid patrols and influence inattentive soldiers. The weight of the darkness around him was suffocating, but he kept his focus. Finally, he reached the great throne room, where Palpatine was waiting for him. The Emperor, seated, watched him with an evil smile. "At last," said Palpatine, his voice laden with irony. "Young Skywalker, so brave and so predictable." Luke stood firm, his gaze fixed on the Sith in front of him. "I've come to put an end to that," he declared. Palpatine laughed. "End it? Well, but isn't that exactly what your father tried once? Look where he is now." Luke was unperturbed. "My father was deceived, but I see through his lies." The Emperor stood up slowly, approaching with controlled steps. "You feel it, don't you? The power of the dark side. It's inevitable, Luke. There's no escaping it." Luke tightened his grip on the lightsaber, but didn't activate the blade yet. "You're wrong. And today, this reign of terror ends." Palpatine narrowed his eyes as he saw that Luke was not backing down in his presence. With a fluid movement, He withdrew a lightsaber hidden under his robes, activating its red blade with a sharp snap. "So, you wish to face me like the foolish Jedi before you?" he said with a cruel smile. Luke didn't answer, just raised his saber in a defensive position. The Emperor attacked first, his quick, precise blows belying his advanced age. Luke blocked easily, slipping between the attacks with a lightness that irritated Palpatine. The duel intensified, blades crossing in bright flashes, while Luke kept his composure, deflecting and counterattacking with surgical precision. Palpatine realized that, for all his experience, he could not overcome Luke's youth and power in direct combat. His smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of irritation. Then, in a sudden movement, he leapt backwards, lowering his saber and raising his hands. "Very well. I see that the skills of a Jedi are still impressive," he said, his voice laced with venom. "But let's see how you handle it." Before Luke could react, a blast of Force lightning erupted from his hands, blue bolts slicing through the air towards the young Jedi. Luke activated his saber and positioned himself defensively, absorbing the energy with the glowing blade. The lightning ricocheted, illuminating the room with blue flashes. Palpatine intensified his attack, trying to bend Luke with the overwhelming force of the dark energy. But Luke, focused and unafraid, stood his ground, slowly advancing towards the Emperor. With every step, the Force guided him. He felt Palpatine's desperation growing. The lightning, once the ultimate weapon, was now becoming his own undoing. The energy reflected by Luke's saber began to hit the Emperor's aged body, which screamed in pain. "It can't be!" cried Palpatine, his eyes wide with terror. Luke took the final step, and the intensity of the lightning became unbearable for the Sith himself. The power he had used to subdue so many was now consuming his own body. With a final scream of agony, Palpatine was destroyed by the very darkness he had nurtured for decades. Just as everything ended, the door opened and Darth Vader entered. He saw the scene before him. The inert body of the Emperor, Luke's saber still activated, and the intense energy of the Force filling the room. There was a moment of absolute silence. Luke then turned to Vader and firmly declared, "Surrender the Empire, or it's all over for you." The choice was before him. The Empire was leaderless, and Vader was now the highest authority left. But Luke gave him no choice. Vader looked at Palpatine's body, at his defeated master, and realized that there was no way forward but to surrender. He took a deep breath, pondering. "The Empire can't go on like this," he said, his voice carrying a weight that even he didn't seem to fully understand. Then he activated his communicator and gave an order for all the Imperial commanders to gather. The transmission echoed through the corridors. But not everyone accepted the decision. Grand Moff Tarkin, one of the Empire's top military leaders, refused to obey. "You have betrayed everything we have built, Lord Vader," he shouted over the comm. "The Empire will never bow to a traitor." The anger in Tarkin's voice was evident. But before he could act, Vader raised his hand, channeling the Force, and began choking him from a distance. "Then you will die along with this Empire," he declared, as Tarkin struggled futilely to breathe. Seconds later, his body fell to the ground. The message was given. No one dared question him again. The orders to disable the Empire's shields and defenses were given immediately. Luke then sent the signal to the High Command of the Rebel Alliance and the Senate, initiating the retaking of the Republic. Within hours, the Imperial leadership had fallen and the planetary systems began to reorganize. The war, which had lasted so long, was finally coming to an end. Darth Vader, now without the armor of the Shadow Emperor, was put on trial by the Senate. His role in the Empire was undeniable, but his decision to hand over power without resistance was considered in his sentence. His sentence was reduced and he was sentenced to detention, where he was monitored. But contrary to what many expected, he was not alone. Luke and Leia visited him often, and even Obi Wan, who previously saw only darkness in his former apprentice, began to notice something different. The shadow of Darth Vader was disappearing. Little by little, he began to be called Anakin Skywalker again. With each conversation with Luke and Leia, with each moment of reflection, he felt the weight of the darkness diminishing. The man who had once been consumed by the dark side now became something closer to the light. And as time passed, and the years brought changes to the galaxy, Anakin saw the last Jedi Master depart. Yoda, the wise guardian of the Force, died in peace, knowing that the Jedi Order was being reborn. Luke, Obi Wan, and Leia worked together to rebuild the galaxy after the fall of the Empire. While Luke and Obi Wan restored the Jedi Order, training a new generation of apprentices to maintain the balance of the Force, Leia became an influential political figure, helping to reestablish the Republic and ensure that justice and freedom once again reigned. Her role was essential in reorganizing the government, uniting star systems under a new era of cooperation and peace. It had been a long road, but the victory was not just over the Empire. It was over the darkness that once threatened to consume everything. With the Jedi reborn and the Republic growing stronger under Leia's leadership, the galaxy found a new direction, sustained by the hope and balance that so many had fought to restore.